know what happens when that happens. So thanks for watching, everybody. Um, excuse me, especially my mom, who I know is watching. So this is for her. And please welcome the one and only Andy Newmark. Andy Newmark, pronounced Andy Newmark. There you are.
It's like waiting to be called onto the witness stand or waiting to be executed. I'm just sitting here staring at the blank computer. It's like, when is it going to happen? When is it? Like,
well, I warned you. I tend to go on a little bit, so it's it's probably worse than waiting for those things because now you're here.
hey, look, nobody is more long-winded than me, as you will experience in the next hour.
Oh, it's so good to see you. Oh man, I tell you, there's a bunch of folks watching, Andy, and so many people are excited to see you besides me. And by the way, I wore this shirt just for you because I thought you'd appreciate it. You
Uh-huh.
get
I love that. And
I
we do need to call in the flying monkeys. Yeah.
yes, we do. We do.
I'm surprised you didn't actually wear the shirt that says Mr. President. That's another story. We'll let people in on that as we go through the session.
Okay.
Why your close friends refer to you as Mr. President. We will reveal that as time goes on. But I'm looking at your drum set. Are you a lefty?
Yes, I am. I'm a lefty.
Oh, we can't do this interview then. Oh no, I'm sorry.
Is
I'm
it messing
sorry.
up your?
This is over. No, I don't talk. I don't talk to lefties.
I don't know if you know. When we did our sound check an hour ago, I had a Ludwig set up. You probably didn't notice, probably didn't see it that clearly, but I had a very good friend of mine, Jim Catalano, do the show with me a couple of days ago, and he worked for Ludwig for 36 years, and really great guy. You might have crossed paths at some point with Jim Catalano in the business, and so I had my vintage Ludwig set up, and then I typically play this 62 Gretsch as my kind of main kit. And
I like it.
I like
it.
You.
I see you have, well, at least 2 drum sets I can see, and there might be a third one right behind you.
That's the Ludwig set, packed up or sort of there. But I have a total in my house as we speak right now, Andy. I just took possession of one of my other Gretsch sets that my son had. So I have 9 of my 10 drum sets in the house at the moment. The 10th one is at where my band rehearses.
Wow, that's a lot of drums.
It's a lot of drums.
The problem
I need help.
The problem with collecting drums is the storage aspect.
Yeah.
If you live in New York City in an apartment and you have a lot of drums, you're paying hundreds of dollars a month to keep them in storage. Now, if you're not living in a city, I suppose, and you have a house, you've got a basement or something, I guess there's more room, but yeah, they take up a lot of room. I mean, drums, it's a lot of space.
It is. We moved, I don't know if I told you this, but we moved, we were living in a townhouse for 23 years, and we moved in the fall to a bigger place. And we're still on the South Shore of Boston. We moved from Situate, Mass to Cohasset, Mass, a little further, one town north of where we were. And we do have more space. And I actually have, Kelly, she didn't have to sell me on the idea of moving, but she said, you can have all this much more space now for your drums. And she knew what buttons to push. So I said, let's do it. And
Yeah.
it's a great spot. So.
Well, I have 2 kits that I've had forever from Yamaha. They gave them to me in the 80s, and they, as drums do, they still work. they don't wear out, drums and
They
cymbals.
don't. Yeah.
They just keep going forever. So I have the same two drum kits.
So
Yeah.
is one of the kits there's a picture or many pictures of you behind a Yamaha, like a natural wood, like a wood grain kit. Is it one of those
Yeah.
the kits? Yeah.
Yeah. One of them, it was the tour series as
Yes.
opposed to the recording custom 9000. They gave them to me in Japan when I was there with Roxy Music. Um, that's how I was introduced to Yamaha. Um, they had arranged to supply the drums to the Roxy Music tour in 1982, supporting the Avalon album. And when I got there, the Yamaha people, what's his name, the one we all
Hagi.
know and love,
Yeah. Hagi.
Hagi,
Yeah.
was there, and he said, "Well, we're introducing you to these drums. We've supplied them for the tour, and if you like them, we'd like to give them to you if you want to become involved with Yamaha." So, yeah, that's how I got involved. It was I'm considered a Japanese-based endorser. I'm not part of Yamaha America or Yamaha UK. Anytime I get anything, it comes out of the Yamaha Japanese budget. It's okay. I mean,
That's okay. Yeah.
it's fine. I'm very grateful for whatever.
Yeah. Sure.
And Hagi, who no one listening to this is going to know anything about him, but he's the guy that really brought Yamaha to the world and to America, and mainly to Steve Gadd, which started the whole Yamaha explosion.
Yeah.
And Steve started playing those drums, but Hagi's long gone now from Yamaha, so it's a different vibe. But anyhow, yeah, that's how I got my drums. I still
You
have
know,
them.
Andy, he's on Facebook and he oftentimes watches these. So we may see him pop up. And I'm glad you mentioned him because if he comments, I'll be sure to let you know. He may want to say hello to you. So that's great that you acknowledged him. I know he was the man that put Yamaha drums on the map, and some great guys came after him like Joe Testa, and there's some good guys now in the States, but Hagi was really the guy. And you were talking about Roxy Music. An old friend of mine, Donnie Brown, he just commented, how about your approach to Roxy Music, especially the Avalon album, record? Any comments on how all that came together and you're playing on those beautiful songs and More Than
Well,
This?
Brian is responsible for the beautiful songs. Let's give Brian the credit for that. He is the force behind Roxy Music. Um, he did the basic tracks by himself. This is when the clicks and the drum machines uh, were coming into 1982. So this is when they were starting to make their presence felt. More the drum machine than the click.
Yeah.
And Brian did the basic tracks alone in England with a drum machine that had various bits of percussion and sometimes a drum kit on there. You can still hear a lot of that stuff because it's in the mix on Avalon. You can hear the machine drums or the machine percussion.
Yeah.
And he did the piano part. He did a rough vocal. He didn't have lyrics, but he would just hum the melody and go, here's the verse, or, identify this as the chorus, and he had some bits and pieces of other overdubs on there. Maybe Andy and Phil, the other two real legitimate members of Roxy Music, they may have put some parts on in the studio. But when Brian brought the tapes to New York, and we were still dealing with tape in 1982, to the power station with Bob Clearmountain, that's what Neil Jason, the bass player, and I were playing to. To Brian, a piano, a humming vocal with the odd lyric, but enough to give you a sense of, you know, where the vocal was at least, and a bit from Phil Manzanera, and a bit from Andy Mackay on sax, um, and the electronic drums. And that's what Neil, Jason, and I played to. And we played live at Power Station. So that's good, because as time went on with the machines, even drummers and bass players playing together live went out of fashion, and it would just be one person at a time when it became really fully anal and obsessive compulsive. You know, it was one musician at a time. But Neil and I at least got to play together. And we just, I mean, it wasn't, you know, Brian's songs, they're pretty, I mean, what they require from a rhythm section is pretty straightforward. And the feel is already there, built into the tempo itself. And the drum machine, I mean, it's not difficult to latch on to a demo like that and play. I mean, essentially, we are talking about backbeat music with a 2 and 4 on the backbeat, and generally in pop music. So we
Wow.
just played along, and Brian would intervene and go, well, okay, I like that in the verse. I don't like your bass drum pattern necessarily in the chorus, and don't do that fill there. And then I, you know, regroup, and then he'd give Neil some, Neil, I like that, but maybe not that. And could you do this? And, you know, would you try another bass? And, you know, we, over a couple of hours, we would just play and work it out and go in the control room, listen with Brian, basically taking our cue from him, as one does. I mean, you taking your cue from the artist and the producer, trying to help them get what they want, not get what you want. But, you know, you're trying to figure out what it is that will please the artist and the producer. So Brian's very good at conveying what he likes and doesn't like. And so it just gradually falls into place. And so yeah, we would get a drum and bass track from beginning to end, you know, in a couple of hours, 2 or 3 hours, maybe, if maybe, you know, it varied, but we would
Yeah.
get 2 songs a day from a session that was noon to 6 p.m. We would get bass and drums on 2 songs. And it wasn't a lot of punching in and, you know, going in 4 bars at a time. We actually, you know, learned the songs after playing them for an hour. You know the song. So at least we were playing the tune live from top to bottom, nonstop, which is good. That helps create some continuity just when someone is playing the song beginning to end.
Right.
And not just going, okay, guys, well, we got the first 4 bars of the intro. Now we're going to punch you in for bar number 5, and we'll get the second half of the intro. And after that, we'll get the verse. Okay, then we'll get a chorus. You know, it hadn't gotten that obsessive in 1982. So at least we got to perform. But, you know, you are working within the constraints of something that has perfect time, a machine.
Mm-hmm. And more than this, was that also played to a click, or with the drum machine? It was all, yeah.
The whole album, he came in with all those songs done with piano, vocal, bit of guitar, bit of sax, all, yeah, everything on that album is played to either the electronic, well, yeah, there were no clicks per se. I mean, there was a click on the machine, but we were not playing to click. We were playing to all the electronic percussion and maybe some drums that he programmed.
I see.
So that's easier to play along with than just a, a click track. It's
Yeah,
easier to
yeah,
play along with something that has momentum and all the little grace notes. And it's just easier to play along with a drum machine playing a groove than a
then
click, which is
yeah,
a click is very naked and stark and the first time you're confronted with it, at least I was intimidated. It's really like a weird experience. The first
yeah,
time somebody put a click up to me, it was pretty overwhelming. It doesn't have much of a musical vibe.
right, right.
It took me some getting used to that, a click. So it was the same with the Sly album, Fresh. That was a really old fashioned little rhythm ace that just had like three settings on it, you know, like a rumba, a cha cha, a tango, and
Yeah,
rock one and rock two.
yeah,
But
yeah,
they were programmed to have all these other little percussive notes within those grooves. So that little rhythm ace, you know, that organ players would use playing at a Holiday Inn,
yes, yes,
they felt fantastic because it was like a real groove. You know,
yeah,
it was
yeah,
easy to play along with that machine um, on Fresh because I mean, it's impossible to not feel the beat.
yeah, yeah.
So
That's that's funny. But I totally know what you're saying. And more than this, the drum fills are you? Those are all
yeah,
you? Are those all in real time, or did you put those on after, or it's all played in real time?
most of it's played in real time. What we might have done then, we would have, for instance, if we added a tom tom onto a snare drum backbeat,
Hmm.
you know, on the backbeat, the two or the four, sometimes, as was the style back then, it actually came from disco records. You would add a tom tom overdubbed on us afterwards. You would just do the tom on the two and the four, so that when you got the backbeat, you'd hear not only the snare, but there'd be this tom tom with it.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
they clearly would have been overdubbed. Brian would take every opportunity to overdub everything possible on different tracks, just so he has the option to choose later on exactly what he wants to use and doesn't want to use. Like he might say, let's add I'll do a take. And then he'll say, okay, I want you to play cymbal now in the chorus. And he'll just have a cymbal on a track
mm,
in case he decides he wants that. Or things like that. He'll just have you improvise doing overdubs. But no, those were all straight ahead performances. And but don't forget, some of the drum fills on some of those songs are machines, and they're pretty identifiable as machines because they don't sound like drums. So I know there's some my heart or heart gently beats or my heart is still beating or something. There's an instrumental. Um, Clearly you can hear some machine drums, though I
hmm.
don't know if one could pick them out today. But the main answer to your question is Brian wanted performances playing with drum fills. So the
Got it.
main thing is, yes, I played my fills and that was the preferred way to get a live feeling take.
Got it. Okay. More than Liz, I've told you this many times, and I mean all that everything you did with Brian, but that song, Jonathan Mover and I have talked about this on many occasions. The intro where you come in and just the placement of where you're putting those fills and the accents, it's absolute genius. It's I just have
Oh,
to.
thank you. Thanks. I mean, you know, just to clarify, there is a way to tell if a drummer has overdubbed the fills, in my experience.
Mm.
If you hear the fill and behind it you hear the drummer still playing the groove,
Yeah.
because that's what they'll be. You'll play a track, and if you don't do the fills, you'll be playing the beat
Right.
through the entire song. And then when you add the fills, you can tell, you can hear that there is still this drum beat going on behind the fill.
Yeah.
So that's the giveaway. If
Right.
if you hear my hi-hat stop and I'm doing a fill and you don't hear any other background drum noise, then that means it happened live. Thing is,
Makes sense. Yep.
it creates a certain feeling when a drummer puts fills over an existing drum groove. That's a whole different vibe that you create, because the groove just keeps going. Nothing ever lets up.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
fills are added, but it's a very different feeling than a drummer stopping playing time and going to the kit and going pa 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 kung. That it's very different.
Yeah. Yep.
Once you lose the beat, yeah, it's two very different things. And some people, prefer to have the drum kit keep going and then overdub fills. But yeah, uh, we were still trying to make things sound like human and real in 1982. It's it's before things, became fully whatever, digitized, and Pro Tools and Logic, and it's 1982. No one was looking at music on a computer screen.
Right. Right.
We were actually listening with our ears, not not listening with our eyes, looking at a screen.
Yeah.
So this was early days before it got anal, deep anal.
Yeah. No, I know we've talked about that too, that what, and we can do that. I want to get into that, but I wanted to just jump backwards for a second. I know a good part of your history from talking about it, but I know you studied, you started playing probably 11 or 12 years old, I think,
I
or
had
even
my
younger than that.
I had my first drum lesson when I was 9, in fourth
9.
grade,
Okay.
fifth grade. I remember it was it would have been 1959. The drum book was Haskell Har, book
Yeah.
1. My drum teacher was a guy who was my sister's girlfriend's brother. He was in 11th grade, Frankie Schrader. And I heard he was giving drum lessons, $1.50 for half an hour, all on a drum pad. And he would sit next to me on a pad. No drums for 2 years, just Haskell Har book 1 and
Wow.
Haskell Har book 2, and then Wilcox, the rudiments. So it was all the, learning a quarter note, then learning an eighth note, 16th note, then you graduate to rests, then you graduate to dotted notes. So I don't even know why I was doing it, because there was nothing terribly exciting about it. I mean, it wasn't even about music. It was
Right.
just this ritual of going to Frankie Schrader's house in his basement once a week and sitting at a pad and going, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and, these really simple things, learning to read. But I guess it must have given me some calmness or satisfaction, because it's predictable and it's tangible and you can understand it. It's like math and numbers. The numbers work or they don't, they add
Yeah.
up, the numbers don't lie. And I would just sit on my couch in the living room in my house and go through these exercises every night with the sticks on the couch, on a pad rather. The pad was on my couch and I just sat there. But it's like, looking back, it had nothing to do with music.
But would you say though, Andy, that, and the reason I asked that question, because, you know, Rick has told me stories about how, I know he's a little older than you, but when you guys were younger, that you were like, you know, you had all this technique at a very young age, that you had all this, had already developed all this great technique, which later paid off, you know, and, you know, when it came time to record and apply it, you
Yeah.
know, so
Well, it helps. It's
yeah,
certain. I mean, I only know in hindsight that, you know, if you start with the basics and just learn, I mean, in the beginning, it wasn't even really developing facility. It was learning, it was really 2 years learning how to read very simple drum notation.
yeah,
You know, we weren't even playing anything that was demanding chops wise. It was just reading something correctly and playing it. And then the rudiments, of course, again, was just learning how to do them slowly. But it's a good, I didn't know it at the time, but it proved to be a good foundation.
mm,
And yeah, so as by the time I was in ninth, 10th grade, I did have a solid foundation of, you know, understanding at least the notation so that anything I played, I knew what it looked like on paper.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I had a concept of what a bar was and how to memorize a song and count bars. And I mean, it's nothing to do really with drumming. It's all the mental stuff, but it helps. And out of it, of course, did come a bit of facility because, like many young drummers in particular, drummers are the worst victims of turning drums into athleticism. I got my first metronome probably in like ninth, eighth, or ninth grade. By then, I graduated to a bass drum and a snare drum and a cymbal. But I got one of those little metronomes that does that,
yeah, yeah.
you know. And I thought, oh, this is cool, you know, this is all right. And of course, with the metronome came this temptation to see how fast I could play. And so
Of course.
I went into the rabbit hole that a lot of drummers go into. The
Yeah.
chops, the tasteless chops, horrible phase.
Well,
I'm not saying the chops are horrible. If you have something to say that requires chops and facility, then you got to have the chops to do it, to say
yeah,
what you want to say.
right,
But
right.
initially, you know, I was just playing rock and roll and, you know, playing paradiddles as fast as I could at 110 BPMs had nothing to do with music. It was just, how fast can I do this?
But when the neighborhood kids came over to the house and you got behind the drums, it impressed them, I'm sure. It was, you know, hey, check this out. Check out my shit, you know.
Yeah. I even went as far of getting the largest drumsticks I could find, biggest, thickest marching sticks. And I got these big metal bolts and screwed them on to the tips, thinking heavier is better.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it means it's going to mean work harder, more sweat, more pain, more heart. Oh, you know, but yes, do it, because you're going to build up muscles and you're going to be bionic drummer. I had these giant bolts screwed onto the ends of the sticks.
yeah.
It was painful. It was
Oh my
doing
God.
much more damage than good.
Yeah. But
Oh
that was,
God,
I
it's
know that,
funny
yeah, that
what
was,
we get up to.
everybody thought that, yeah, you make the sticks as heavy as you can and it's going to build up those muscles and then you're going to play faster. And yeah, I know it's
You see,
well,
the beauty of what happened to Ricky Marotta was that he bypassed all of that and just sat down at 18 years old. And Ricky's only motivation was to actually play music. Who'd have thunk it? Yeah, Andy, I want to play music. I don't want to do all that. I want to like groove and have fun,
yeah,
you know. So it's just a good lesson to see our two personalities, because Rick went into it with none of that training. It's just he figured out how to do a basic beat, and he borrowed some drums off a guy in our town that got drafted, Billy Reed.
yeah,
We got Billy's drums set up in Ricky's attic, and Ricky's whole position from day one at 17, 18 years old was just, I want to make music out of this. And he learned a beat, and then he'd play his beat to all these, R&B records that he'd put on. But do you understand what I mean? His
yeah,
entire
yeah,
mental orientation was about using the drums to be involved in making music.
yeah,
Many
yeah,
youngsters get onto another track. Well, at least I did.
yeah, yeah. No,
I'm,
I
I'm a
know.
re-
Yeah.
I'm a recovering chopster, recovering chops addict.
Well, I'd say you made the most of all of that stuff, Andy, because no one is going to disagree with the fact that you've got an amazing feel, an amazing groove, and you've got all those chops and facility, but you certainly landed where you needed to land when it came to like making it feel great for the rest of the band and playing songs. And I just have to tell you that Stanley Sheldon just tuned in and says hello to you and to me.
Yeah. Hey, Stanley in Kansas.
Yeah, good old Stanley. Yeah, I met
Hey.
him. I met him for the first time a couple of years ago in Nashville, um, when Rick was down there doing something for Harry McCarthy at Harry's Place, Drum Paradise, and when they were just getting the Ronin band back together with Waddy, and they were rehearsing at SIR. So got to
You
hang out with
sent me
Stanley.
you sent me the photograph.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
I
yeah,
have the photo of you guys.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Stanley.
Stanley. Yeah.
Just some of the people listening might have heard this story, but some probably haven't. I'll condense it, but it's worth saying just to explain what it was like in the beginning for Rick and I. And I think this makes a point. When we were young, I might have been like, I don't know, 19 or 20. Rick was a year or two older. We were living together in
Mhm.
Westchester. And he had a gig with Al Cooper, and who Al Cooper formed Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Mm.
And he had left Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Ricky was playing for him. They just had a 4-piece band or something. But Ricky was leaving the Al Cooper thing, and he got me an audition. And Ricky came with me down to the bitter end on Bleecker Street in New York City for the one afternoon where I played an audition for Al Cooper. And I really overplayed. I was not playing what Al Cooper was doing. I was not responding to another human being's thing in the room. I was just caught up in my own head. And at the time, Ricky and I had been going to see Tony Williams' Lifetime a lot, and some club Unganos and Arthur's and places in New York. And I really was taken aback by Tony Williams' Lifetime. So I was in a phase where I was stretching out and doing kind of stuff inspired by Tony Williams, though it was my version of it. And this is what I was doing at the audition. And it just showed you how out of touch I was. And like, we took a break, and Al Cooper went into the back room in the dressing room. And, Ricky says, "Hey, man, I got to tell you, you're fucking this up. you know what, this is like a little embarrassing for me. I recommended you. You're playing all this wacky, crazy shit, and like Al Cooper could care less. You basically blown it. You need to get your act together. It wasn't hostile or anything nasty. We were
Yeah.
good friends. We could speak with each other, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me was that a good friend leveled with me and said, "Come on, man, what are you doing? You've just blown this audition. Save all that stuff you're doing for the practice room or somewhere else. You didn't respond to the situation here with Al Cooper just playing simple groove piano parts. You're like on another planet, and you didn't get the gig." And that was a real wake-up call.
Wow.
And from that, I thank Ricky for that. And though one could look at it and go, "Andy, you lost." In fact, I call it that I won, because sometimes when you lose, you win,
Yeah.
because you need to take a knockdown. You need some defeats in order to come back from them. So defeats can be winning in a way. If you're
Yeah.
always victorious, you never know what it's like to be defeated or fail. So I learned that lesson in the next audition I went on with Carly Simon. I had it together. I was fully focused. I wasn't messing around. I played dead simple. Carly just wanted a drummer that played like Russ Kunkel.
Hmm.
That's it. She said, "I love Russ Kunkel." Before I auditioned, I listened to Sweet Baby James.
Hmm.
That showed really showcased Russ Kunkel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I sort of clocked it and went into the audition with Carly, and it was fine. I was back on track. But I just thought it was a good story of what
That's a
happened with Rick and I, living together, uh, competitive, but yet good friends. And yet, he did take me and turn me on to an audition and really set me straight when I started overplaying. And it was stupid of me, because I came up and from the age of 14 to 18, I was playing rhythm and blues.
yeah. Yeah.
It was only when I saw Tony Williams when I was about 19 that my mind expanded. But up to that point, I was a 2 and 4 rhythm and blues rock and roll drummer, and behaved myself and played the groove and
Yeah.
worked a lot. But then I had this departure at 19 that just, I started stretching out. I mean, this partially that's what was going on in the 60s. Drummers
Yeah.
were much more adventurous. Mitch Mitchell,
Yep.
Keith Moon, uh, Danny Serafine.
Yeah. Danny. Yeah. Absolutely. Yep.
I mean, that Chicago album, CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, they were going for it like jazz cats. You know,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Danny was really reaching for it. It was, and it was inspired. It was great. So, I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of that was going on in the 60s, where rock drummers were really reaching.
And
You
the
know,
Allman Brothers too. The Allman Brothers.
yeah.
Again. Yeah. For an American. Yeah.
And as time went on, the industry sort of made a lot of that stuff become not fashionable, and drummers somehow became brainwashed that if they wanted to work, you better cool it with all that and learn to play simple and play a feel and a back. It kind of, the business drove a lot of that creativity out of drummers,
Hmm.
because the flow of music became much more, you know less creativity and more groove. And so it kind of stifled that movement, the Mitch Mitchells and Danny Serafines, and guys that were really going for it. It kind of squashed
Hmm.
that movement a bit, because guys felt like, well, if I want to work, that's not the way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have to be able to just play a backbeat, play simple, accompany the song, and it you don't know it's being forced upon you, but it is, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story that you told, and it is a great lesson though in terms of, you know, at least knowing when you go for an audition, at least being aware of what the person is expecting to hear. You know, I think if nothing else, that's a great takeaway. And your story is a great segue because I wanted to talk about Carly and that was your first session. Like, was that your actual first recording session working with Carly? Like anticipation and
It was not the first time I was in a recording studio. I had done the odd session, but it was the first time I was with an artist and went in and was a part of the band and was
yeah,
going to spend 6 weeks in the studio every day and really being in it and a part of it and knowing I was making a record for someone. And Carly had already had a name because her first album had a hit single on it called That's the Way I Always Heard It Should Be.
right.
So yeah, that was my first, real experience of getting my head wrapped around the studio thing. I had been called in to do a session for a big horn band in New York a year or two before that called 10 Wheel Drive. Um, I remember feeling a little bit like a fish out of water on that session. Just the whole recording studio thing was a little overwhelming to me. Um, when I lived in Bermuda, I did an album with the band I was with there when I was 17 years old, the
Hmm.
Bermuda Jam. We cut an album. I have it right here. It's the Bermuda Jam. Again, the studio is a very alien thing to me. And so, yeah, it wasn't until Carly Simon that I thought, okay, I'm going to be doing this every day. I know what she wants. I know what I want. My instincts were beginning to develop. I was 21 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
And so,
Unbelievable.
yeah, that was the first time I got a chance to record good songs with a meaningful artist. Anticipation, yeah, has to be considered the start.
You
Yeah.
could have just recorded that one song, Andy, and had a place in drumming history forever, just with that one track, let alone the whole record. But what
It's
a
funny.
song.
It's funny when I hear that song. Someone asked me recently in an email if I would please notate the two big drum fills, like somehow notate it. And I didn't have notation paper, and it involved then having to scan it. And I think I tried to explain it to him in English, what the notes were, a dotted
Yeah.
quarter followed by whatever. But when I hear it, um, I cringe a little bit
Oh,
to maybe a lot of bit.
oh,
It's well, again, I'm gonna, this is how the industry has groomed my brain. But of
okay.
course,
Yeah.
the first thing I noticed is that the time is not steady through those fills, not at all. I mean, there were no click tracks and drum machines. That was all just a trio playing along with Carly. There was no obsessing on time and meter. It was just about getting an
Yeah.
organic performance. But it troubles me when I hear it that, the time in those fills in particular is not steady, but you still know what I mean when I
Yeah.
do it. You can tap your foot through it more or less. But I have to say, if I did it again today, I would play something different than those fills. The fills just bug me, now. It's just like, well, I think, what were you trying to say? And I think I was just trying to figure out, I had like a month to work out these fills because we
Yeah.
had been rehearsing the tunes in New York before we went to England. So I was like, okay, yeah, this is my chance. You know, two big drum fills in my first recording, 21 years old, Carly Simon. Yeah. And it's like, I would be like sitting, in our little apartment in London and like going through all these amazing possibilities of what one could possibly play over those 6 beats or 8 beats, like ridiculous shit. Right? It's like, it wasn't about what would be musical here. Like, let me carry on from where Russ Kunkel started and let's do something musical and tasty and sparse like Carly likes. No, it was like, okay, this is like the bolts on the end of the sticks.
No. I got Andy. I have to disagree with you. I think they're so tasty. They're so tasty, and they're so perfect for that song. Both the second one to me is one of the greatest fills of all time. That second one is like, forget it.
I can live with it, and I'm glad you like it. Of course, I did in the end come to my senses and come up with something reasonably, musical and whatever you want to call that. But I mean, I have to tell you that the preparation and the things that I practiced or imagined playing in those holes were so ridiculous.
This is the behind the scenes story. I want to hear it.
I mean, I came to my senses. You just sort of eventually you realize, I mean, that it's just some things are just completely ridiculous. It's like, you got to play something that is in the flow of the rhythm of the song, something tangible that human beings can latch onto. So, yeah, but it was, oh God, I remember. That was funny, man. But I was grateful to be there to get a break with a name artist so young.
Yeah, I know.
And get that exposure because it had only been in the last few years, like from the late 60s, where they started putting musicians' names on albums.
Right.
Like I started seeing Hal Blaine and Earl Palmer and Jim Gordon's names, but in like even 1966 or 7, those guys didn't even get credits in LA.
Right.
That Wrecking Crew got all that Wrecking Crew lot and Earl Palmer.
Mm-hmm.
There were no musician credit, but somehow it started becoming fashionable in the very late 60s that you'd see people's names, and I'd see Bernard Purdy for the first time in my life.
Yeah.
I saw Jim Gordon's name on a Jose Feliciano album. I saw Hal Blaine's name, of course. And Earl Palmer, I had his solo album, Drumsville. Cool. And guys were getting credits. So by 1971, when I was with Carly, it was a given. Hey, your name is going to be on the back of the record. This is like a calling card to the world.
Yeah.
What better advertisement could you ever wish for? And, when your name's going to be on the back of the record, that's a big incentive to really want to make it be as good as possible, right?
Yeah.
And that became how all of us of that era became popular. The credits on the back of the album did all the advertising work for us.
Yeah.
You didn't have to go out and hustle and schmooze or do anything. People would see the name and go, well, I like the way this person sounds on this. Find me this person.
Find
me this guy, whoever he is, or girl. I like that. And there's a funny saying, the arc of a studio musician's career.
Yes.
It starts with, who is Andy Newmark? Then the next phase is, get me Andy Newmark. And then the next phase is, get me someone much less expensive than Andy Newmark. And then the final phase is, who is Andy Newmark?
I love it. I love it. I think the first time I ever saw your name, I think was on the Carly on Anticipation. I'm pretty sure of that. My sister had all her, early records. She's 5 years older than me. I would have been 11 in 1971, and I was just getting into playing drums and music and listening to records all the time and reading liner notes. And I'm pretty sure that is where I first saw your name, and I started seeing it more and more. And you know how that goes.
Listen, Carly even put a picture of me on the inside sleeve with my hair to here. She had photographs of Paul Glanz, the piano player, Jimmy Ryan, guitar, myself. Even on the inner sleeve, there were like really nice photos of us. So it's like, it was more than just a credit. I felt like, oh my goodness, God, how look at this. I even have a picture in here. And then, hearing it on the radio in my 66 Chevrolet that Ricky Murata's father, Chris, sold me.
Yeah. Oh, funny.
I bought a 66 Chevrolet Impala from Ricky's father. I'd be cruising around in New York in my 66 blue Chevy Impala with the radio on WABC and hearing Anticipation. I'm like, yeah, this is it. I've arrived. This is really the business. How cool is this?
Well, you had arrived though. I have to tell you, one of my bandmates is watching. My band plays that song, and oftentimes I'll apologize to you before we play it or after we play it for butchering those fills, because I hear myself trying to play it note for note and never executing, but always with you in mind, with the deepest respect and admiration. You know that.
Thanks. I mean, does it make sense enough that you know what I intended the fill to be, and
Yeah,
you
it
kind of
took me a while.
understand where the notes are? Okay,
You know what, Andy? I have to tell you, and I won't spend a lot of time talking about me trying to play it, but I will admit that when we first started playing it, I didn't attempt that second fill. The first fill, really makes sense, where it boom, 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 But the second one, a couple of times I tried to play it like you, and I could tell the band wasn't following me, probably because I wasn't really putting the notes in the right spot. But it's one of those things where I think I'm sure you've experienced this. It's like you overthink things, and you stop and just you take a fresh approach and listen to it, and I just listened to where the notes really were, and it was a lot easier for me to at least find a way for it to fall into place so that everybody comes back in with me at the end of the second one. So,
and if it was really played in time, it would have been easier to grasp. The fact that it does rush and wouldn't stand up if you put a click up against it, it is a slightly confusing affair, that fill, a little bit. But if it at least had it been really strictly in time, it would have been more comprehensible. But it was a weird assortment of notes that I chose.
it's a masterpiece. I'm gonna say it again. It's a masterpiece. So from that record came Carly's next record, or there was probably, I'm sure there were sessions in between, but the next record that had You're So Vain. And we won't spend the whole day talking about your work with Carly, but I found something interesting, and I wanted to ask you this. So when you were in London, doing that record, that was before you were doing Ronnie Wood's record, right? That was a couple of years, or at least a year before that.
Well, I was Anticipation. We were in London, July 1971.
Yeah.
We actually arrived in London on my birthday, July 14. No Secrets with Carly was the following autumn in 72.
Yeah.
When I watched Jim Gordon record You're So Vain.
Yeah.
The following year in 73 is when Fresh came out.
Yes. Okay. Yep.
And 74 is when I was with Ronnie Wood and Keith Richard and Willie Weeks.
Okay. All
So
right.
a big gap, 71, Ronnie Wood, and that I've got my own, the Ronnie Wood solo album.
I've got my own
Yeah,
record to make.
and
Yeah.
there's
Album.
footage of us, YouTube footage of us in concert as well.
Right.
That was a 3-year gap,
Okay.
71 to 74.
But lots of work in between. You mentioned Fresh, which many people are commenting on that are watching, just saying, absolute masterpiece in time.
It was a big learning experience for me to watch Jim Gordon record You're So Vain. Carly brought us to England to do the second record.
Mm.
And it was with a big time, very successful producer who had made lots of hit records named Richard Perry.
Sure. Yeah.
And it was very different vibe than the previous record, which was Cat Stevens' producer, Paul Samwell Smith. One was a very intimate, small band record. No Secrets was a big production. Anyhow, we went through all the songs, the band, when we got to London in 72. And we were suitable on maybe 5 or 6 of them. But Richard Perry had very specific ideas and said, okay, well, it works with Andy on these songs, but I'm bringing in Jim Gordon to do these songs. And one of them is You're So Vain. So whatever it was I was doing when we were working on You're So Vain, it was not happening for Richard Perry. And Gordon came in. I had really admired him a lot. I knew about his work.
Mm.
And I went to the studio and just said, hey, Jim, I'm Carly's road drummer. Do you mind if I sit in the drum booth and watch you play? And he was like, hey, it's cool. By the way, we share the same birthday, July 14, but he's 5 years older than me. So I got to sit in the drum booth and watch Jim Gordon come up with the drum part for You're So Vain. And that, in 3 or 4 hours, I learned more than I think I've learned in my entire 22 years of my life. I learned more watching Jim Gordon come up with that drum part, and just to see him physically doing it, not just hearing it, but when you see a drummer doing it, there's an added thing to it. You see the body language, and it all kind of makes more sense. So that was mind-blowing, what I learned from Jim that day. Because that You're So Vain groove, kind of dum, 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 you're so vain, dum, dum, that boom, 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 that kind of California laid back boom, boom, boom,
Yeah.
boom. I wasn't cool with that. That was like very West Coast, relaxed Californian. I was into a much more funky head.
Yeah.
And being able to make that beat, dum, boom, boom, really sit down. I was not capable of that the moment I was watching Jim Gordon. I knew it. It was kind of just out of my vocabulary, and he owned it and made it feel so good. And I really understood watching him. Man, it's about conviction and owning every note that you play. I really got it loud and clear that Jim knows exactly what he's going to do every bar, exactly what he's going to play. He can do it over and over for 30 takes. If Richard Perry gives him instruction, he has the brain to alter it and remember it and incorporate it. But the conviction behind every note on the hat and the snare, the grace note, there was nothing, there were no throwaway notes. There was no spontaneity. He was programmed like a drum machine to deliver that drum part. And it is a brilliant drum part if you sit down and listen to it. It's got 3 or 4 different gears. It's got the cross stick. Uh, Anyhow, I really understood when I saw Jim what is involved in making what for me is good music.
Hmm.
I really got it from Jim Gordon big time about what I had to do to move, clean my act up and move out of my funky New York head and all my little busy funky things, away from all that fresh stuff. I had to learn to leave all that behind and go learn how to cool that shit out and play simple and make it really sit down. But at least I knew that. I knew I had to
Yeah.
learn how to do that. And Jim Gordon was like, that was the day the door opened.
Wow. Did you spend much time? Did you interact a lot with him during that time? Did you guys?
No, I saw
No.
him. I said goodbye to him that day. He was in traffic then.
Yeah.
Derek and the Dominoes, that was over. I think he was in traffic. Anyhow, he was in London with some act. Richard Perry got him into the studio. But no, I only saw Jim one more time, maybe a year later in California. I called him and said, hey, remember me? And he said, hey, man, got some people up at my house tonight. Come on, here's the address. Come up to my house. I went up to his house. There were people there and hanging, and I saw him again. And he's a very mellow cat,
Yeah.
relaxed, mellow guy. Huge, tall, big guy, like 6'3" or 4", a really big man,
Yeah.
but a gentle giant. And I hung and never saw him again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's great that you had that hang with him and that you had that experience and you took something away from it too that you were able to use later, because after that came all these records that you did that you grooved your ass off on, and
You know, there was a blog in California connected to the prison. I guess we can talk. I'm just going to talk about it. There
yeah.
was a blog site connected with the prison social services in California where Jim is and
Yeah.
was.
Yep.
And on the blog, there was a prisoner who had come out of prison but was in the prison rock band.
Yeah.
And he wrote on the blog that they had been trying to coax Jim Gordon for a year to come and sit in with the prison band
Yeah.
because they all knew who he was.
Yeah.
And Jim refused. And one day, Jim said, okay, I'll play. And Jim sat in, and the band had already rehearsed a bunch of Derek and the Dominoes tunes.
Wow.
And Jim played them like he had just done them all yesterday.
Yep.
And of course, everyone in the band was absolutely mind blown and goosebumps. And when this bass player in the band came out of prison, he wrote about all this and this amazing experience in prison, meeting Jim and Jim finally sitting in with the prison band. I read it in 2013. I read this.
Yeah.
And I then wrote on the blog, well, check this out, everybody. Here's my experience meeting Jim Gordon. And I wrote an essay, must have been over 1,000 words. I really went deep on it, of
Yeah.
what I just told you about watching Jim Gordon play in 1972. I wrote a piece about that. And that went on the blog. And people all over were reading this.
Yeah.
And eventually, Rick Mattingly saw it at Percussive Arts Society, PAS magazine.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
and Rick Mattingly called and said, look, I've seen this article you wrote about meeting and watching Jim Gordon. PAS is very much an educational magazine. We would like to publish this. Do you mind? Because we think this is valuable just to hear you speaking about watching Jim. And so it got published in the PAS May 2014. PAS magazine, my whole essay. And do you know what? Rick sent me a few copies. He entered photos of me and Carly and Jim Gordon, all in there with the really well, nicely done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mailed it to Jim in prison.
Oh,
I
that's great.
got his ID number, cell block number, all his details from a friend of mine in the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. We knew exactly where Jim was and how to get this mailed to him. So I mailed it to Jim and I said, hey man, just want you to know I think about you a lot. You had such an impact on me. I want you to read the story. I hope it makes you feel good. If you ever want to call me, please call me collect. I'll take the charges. I'm here if you ever want to speak, but no pressure. I still
Yeah.
have the letter in my computer. I can produce that letter in a PDF, my letter to Jim, along with my essay. I knew I would never hear from him, and I didn't, but I know he got it. I'm
Yeah.
sure he got it.
You know what, Andy, I think prior maybe to when you sent the letter, I remember us communicating about this. When you started to talk about that blog, I think you may have sent me a link to that blog. I feel
Or,
like
or, or I either the link, or I then started, I did copy and paste and had it on a PDF.
yeah,
So then I would just start sending the PDF around. But
yeah,
yeah, I'm not surprised I shared it with you because I shared it with a lot of folks.
yeah. It's wonderful that you did that. And who knows, you might, um, out of the blue one day, get a phone call or get a letter or something, which would be amazing, but
Well, I
he
know
got it.
I don't know how, if you want to move on, we can, but I can tell you a little more about Jim
Sure. Yeah.
from what I've heard from a lady who has been in touch with him over the years and actually visited him once. And this is what I've been told. Jim has sabotaged his own parole year after year. He went into prison in 84. He was eligible for parole in 2004.
Yeah.
And he would sabotage the parole by, again, this is what I've been told. He would stop taking his schizophrenia medication, stop going to talking therapy sessions. So when he came up before the parole board and they said, well, you're not taking your schizophrenia medication regularly like you're subscribed. If you do that on the outside world, you could become a danger if you come off your medication.
Mm-hmm.
So parole is denied. And he has done this continually. And the girl
Wow.
said that Jim is never going to come out, doesn't want to be in the outside world, that he has become institutionalized. And that's where and what did she say? No prison will ever beat Jim up more than Jim is beating himself up for what he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. She said, and it's not something you can even talk to him about. I mean, listen, you got to take everything this person says with a grain of salt because people do talk shit.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
she just said, she saw him once in prison, and it's the one thing you could not go near. You could talk about anything, but this is not something that is a subject he will talk about. But this is what she sensed, that he is going to punish himself for the rest of his life for what happened. And
Yeah.
and so now I'm like, well, golly, what would Jim do if he did come out? Well, I mean,
Yeah.
he's 75 years old. I mean,
Right.
is he gonna, I mean, is he gonna go play drums, or are people gonna hire him? Or, I mean, we're 70 now. I mean, plus there's COVID, nobody's working anyhow. But I
Yeah.
mean, Jim and I we've had our heyday. I mean, I don't play hardly at all anymore. So the chances of Jim getting out and becoming a busy freelance drummer again, you know, oh, what are the chances of that? But I mean, surely he's got royalties because he has a writing credit on the Derek and the Dominoes, that
Layla.
Layla on
Oh, the
the
whole
end,
record. Yeah.
the
Yeah.
piano piece. So he's got money to live on royalties, but yeah, that's what I'm told. He does not want to get parole.
Yeah. I think I heard something similar, Andy. Yeah, and probably I have to think that he feels in his mind safer there. I think, or maybe that's not the right word, but
No, it is a
um,
good word.
yeah,
It probably does feel safe. And in a way, you are safe in prison once you adjust to it. You've got your food,
hmm
medical, a bed to sleep in. I mean, for many guys and girls, I suppose, but I know many prisoners have said they finally felt safe when they got to prison because they had security and food and a roof over their head and a routine and structure in their life, which they had never had before.
hmm yeah, yeah,
So, yeah, you would begin to feel safe.
safe. Yeah, yeah. Well, that's very insightful, and I could
Yeah.
talk about Jim Gordon all day. I'm with you. He's. I mean, and thank God he left the legacy that he left us, and we can remember all that, all the incredible music that he's made, and
There's
you know,
a lot of YouTube videos of him playing with Mamas and Papas and Mama Cass and tons of Derek and the Dominoes,
yeah.
um, Mad Dogs and Englishmen.
I was going to
And
say, yeah, the letter, yeah,
I even stumbled upon a Jim Gordon solo album with all the Wrecking Crew LA guys. They're 12 instrumentals. Uh, and it's really, really good. I mean, it's like instrumental versions of pop songs, but with all the happening players of the time. And I think it's on Spotify. It's
oh,
called
okay,
Jim Gordon's Pops and Jazz Orchestra or something. I mean, it's really obscure. No, it didn't sell any records, but it was released. And well, he's just on the money.
yeah, yeah,
Everything he played on, he
I know,
just is so consistent and solid, and everything is so well premeditated and planned out. He just never seems to go off the track at all. It's just,
yeah,
anyhow, it's
you know,
all there to watch.
and I'll just finish it off by saying that both Hal Blaine, who was a very, very good friend of mine, and Jeff Beccaro, who I knew, and yourself and Rick and Steve Gadd have always obviously spoken fondly about Jim. But what many of you guys, his contemporaries, have always said as well is that he had a great, and Keltner as well have said he had a great sound. He really knew how to get a great sound, and of course, engineers have a lot to do with that too. But he would come into a session with a great sounding drum kit, like he knew what cymbals to play,
Mm.
for a session, and tune the drums to. I think of you're so vain. I think you had told me that it was a kit. It was the kit that was provided in the studio. It wasn't his personal kit, um, but he really could. I think of all those records, and besides always having the best part to play, the drums, and I think a lot of that comes from the drummer, getting the drums to sound really good.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
just, the way he'd hit them, the way he'd tune
Yeah.
them, he knew how to extract, make a good noise.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yep.
Jim was actually the predecessor. Jim Keltner and Jim Gordon were a couple of years ahead of Ricky Marotta and I.
Yeah.
They were already broke on the scene with Mad Dogs and Englishmen in 1969 and Delaney and Bonnie. Rick and I were just starting to come through at that point. So we really looked up to Jim Gordon, Jim Keltner, Russ Kunkel, Bernard Purdy. Those were the guys we, were really studying closely how they played.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I want to jump to a couple other just notable things that I made a note of. We've talked about Sly Stone. We've talked about Fresh. A couple of guys are asking about Roger Waters, which we can get to as well. But the reason I mentioned, and also Gary Wright, Love Is Alive, another great. Um, you're on that one, right? And Jim's on Dreamweaver, Keltner's on Dream. Yeah, yep. Fabulous track. Just like, I just want to just say that. I know that other people have probably commented on that, and if you, and my point to this, Andy, is if you had told me the same guy that played on Anticipation played on that song, I wouldn't have put it together right away. And I think it really shows your versatility. And maybe by that point, that was around 75 or 76 when you recorded that, if I have that right. The Gary Wright stuff, Gary Wright.
Yeah, around that time.
Yeah.
Well, the truth is this: the way I played on Fresh and Love Is Alive and a lot of other stuff that is very much nothing like Anticipation.
Yeah.
All that stuff is where I am coming from. The departure was Anticipation, not the Sly stuff and the Love Is Alive. That's the way I always played.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the Carly, the brushes, playing brushes and the big open fills like Ringo and Russ Kunkel. That was the departure for me, to move away from all my. So the Fresh thing is what I had been cooking up ever since I was 14 years old. I mean, and Love Is Alive. You know what I mean? That's what I was really about.
Yeah. Yeah.
Carly, the soft folk rock brushes thing, that was the departure. That was going new territory for me.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's good.
What I mean?
That's good clarification. And I mentioned the Ronnie Wood record, and where I was going with that was, besides how great that record was. And I have to tell you, I've told you this story. I want everybody to hear this story. This would have been, you remember we went to see Charlie Watts play at Ronnie Scott's in the early 2000s
With Peter Erskine.
Yeah, and Steve White and Mark Mondese, and
I have a photograph of us.
Yes, yeah.
I have that photo.
Yep, I love that photo. All of us there at Ronnie's.
Yeah, Charlie, Peter, down in the dressing room.
That's right. Yeah. So we had that great hang with Charlie, and then maybe, if memory serves, I was back in London some months later, and you had just done a gig with Ronnie Wood. This would have been around 2004 or 5. You a benefit maybe or something.
It was in a theater, Drury Lane Theater.
Okay. And so Charlie, when I was speaking with, I think I told you this story. I was speaking with Charlie while I was there, and he said, I went and saw Ronnie play, and that your friend Andy, that really good American drummer, was playing drums. And I said, and I couldn't, not that and I went, oh, Andy Newmark. And he went, yeah, that's it. He was embarrassed. He couldn't remember your last name right away, but of course he knew who you were. And he said, your friend Andy, that really good American drummer, was playing with Ronnie. And then I think you told me about it later. You mentioned that it was a fun gig, and
anything to do with Ronnie Wood is first and foremost fun.
Yes.
First, before anything, being in Ronnie's presence is so fun and joyful. It all rolls down, trickles down from the top. Ronnie is a fun, beautiful, caring guy that would give you the shirt off his back. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
I love Ronnie.
I don't know him like you do. I've met him a few times through Charlie, and he has this really genuine, happy, positive, always smiling, and Keith too. Whenever I've met, I mean, they're just really like guys that, you think, people on the outside think like they're the luckiest guys in the world. And I think they probably know that too, in a good way. Like they're like, yeah, how great is it to be able to do what I do? And I get to play music and yeah, you just get that from Ronnie. He's just a happy guy. But, and where
I
I'm going
wonder,
with Ron, oh, go
I
ahead. Sorry.
wonder if, I mean, I wonder if we're ever going to see the Rolling Stones play live again, because
I
by
know.
the time this COVID thing is over, and who knows really when it's going to be over and you can have a live concert, we don't know that. But
Right.
at the Stones' age, you have to wonder if there's the lockdown for concerts goes another year or two or three, will it be past uh, their shelf date? Will they ever come out and play again?
I know. I know. Charlie will turn 80 in June. And Mick and Keith are 2 years younger, and Ronnie's a few years younger than that. But I know it's a big question. I sure hope so. At least, next year, 2022 would be their 60th anniversary. So if they're all up to it and healthy enough, it would make sense. Hoping that it's safe enough for everybody to be out, back in big places together,
You
that they
think there'll
could.
be concerts in a year?
I do. I think a year from now, with what they're doing with the vaccine, and although I do worry because here in Massachusetts, where I am, the case numbers are going up again. Not surprisingly, because they've relaxed restrictions in a lot of places everywhere in the States. But the good news is they're vaccinating. I just got the Johnson & Johnson shot last week. I got the one and done shot, so I'm good. But people are getting vaccinated. So even with the numbers going up, if they can just keep doing that, hopefully it's gonna level off. Um, I don't know, Andy. I'm trying to be optimistic. I'm trying to think that we'll have
Mm.
some version of our old lives again.
I got the AstraZeneca, the English one.
Mm. Are you all? Is it a two shot or one?
Two.
Two.
But
And you're
here
all
in
done.
England, uh, even though the drug trials were based on 3 weeks in between shots, here in England, they've decided to disobey the drug trial rules. And in an effort to get shot number one into as many people as possible, they have delayed shot number two for 12 weeks.
Holy shit! I hadn't heard that.
That's what's from day one in England. They made a decision.
Okay.
We want to get shot number one into as many people as quickly as possible. And we're going to delay and go 12 weeks for shot number two, because there's so much protection given even in shot number one.
Mm-hmm.
There's a
Well,
lot of protection from even shot number one.
yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
I have a 12-week interval.
How much longer do you have to wait until that time is up? How far into
Mine
the
is
12 weeks?
on 21 April.
Okay, so soon, 3 weeks.
Yeah,
Great. That's
yeah.
great. Um, but I want to just jump back to Ronnie Wood just for a quick second, because that record, that first solo record you played on, I've got my own album to do, um, recorded in '74. I Can Feel the Fire and all that. Um, were you so the Rolling Stones? It's Only Rock and Roll. I know you know this history. That song really was derived from Ronnie and Mick Jagger jamming at the Wick at Ronnie's studio, and Woody supposedly came up with the sort of basic structure of the song, maybe.
And I believe it's Kenny Jones,
It's
isn't it?
Kenny Jones. Yeah. So it is. It's Kenny because, and I wondered, were you around at the time they recorded that? Because it was from those sessions, but maybe later than when you were there. But I thought it was.
No, it was just before I went in April of '74. I went over to London to join Ronnie. and I was there for 2 or 3 months recording at his house every night. That track had already been done,
I see.
and I brought Willie Weeks into those sessions,
Yeah.
and it is Willie Weeks playing the bass on that.
Right.
Because Keith, who was on the Ronnie Wood sessions, was, digging on Willie,
Yeah.
what's not to be digging on,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
and said, all right, Willie, yeah, I need you to play bass on a Rolling Stone song. So one night when we had a night off with Ronnie, we drove out to Mick Jagger's home at the time in west of London in Berkshire, and the name of the house was Stargroves.
Yes.
And they
Yep.
had a mobile recording truck there. And Willie went in. I drove out with him just to go along for the ride and see what I was going to see and hang out. And Willie put the bass on that. And
Okay.
I had no idea that it was not Charlie for many years.
Me too. Yeah, me too. I didn't know, but I will say this. I'm a massive Charlie fan. When that record came out, when that single was released in the summer of '74, the song "It's Only Rock and Roll, But I Like It." The record came out, a month later, and I remember as a 14-year-old, 13, almost 14-year-old kid, thinking how different. Just the drums, not even the playing so much, although that did sound a bit different to me, but I couldn't really discern it that much. But the sound of Charlie's drums sounded, in my mind, much different on that one track than the rest of the record. And I later learned that it was Kenny at Ronnie's studio, presumably on a kit that maybe Kenny had left there. I think maybe is one of his Ludwig kits or something. That it wasn't the way the rest of that, how there's a consistency in the sound of the drums in a record, and you have like If You Can't Rock Me, Somebody Will, and Time Waits for No One, and all these other songs that are on that record. And the snare drum has this big open, unmuffled kind of bonk honk to it. So
I
I remember,
used the same kit. They were Kenny Jones
Okay.
drums. He gave them to Ronnie. It was, from the Faces.
yeah,
Well,
okay,
Kenny probably had 10 drum kits by then, but he gave Ronnie the kit. When I came to England, I only brought a couple of pair of drumsticks, no drums, and I played those Kenny's drums. That was the studio kit in Ronnie Wood's home.
wow,
So yeah, that whoever came in there to play over whenever would play on those drums.
on those
I
drums,
did.
okay,
Kenny did. Ringo came
Yep.
in and did a song. Yeah. So that's Kenny's old Ludwig kit. They sounded fine. I mean,
Sounded
it's
beautiful,
hard to
yeah,
find a drum set that doesn't sound good. Put it
yeah,
that way.
exactly.
Drums genuinely sound good. Unless
Especially if,
unless
yeah,
you get like some lemon drum that comes off the production line and the wood is warped and it's not a perfect cylinder, and unless there's a defect, most drums sound pretty damn good, don't you think? I mean,
absolutely. And I know Kenny at that time was a Paiste artist. And I mean, as I got older and more mature, I realized, yeah, those do sound like Paiste cymbals. You don't remember what they were, if they were like it would have been maybe Giant Beat or 2002s or something, or yeah.
I don't remember at all. And I remember I wouldn't bring my cymbals because I was afraid going through English customs that with my long hair
Yeah.
and being 1974, if they saw me coming in with cymbals, the first thing they would be questioning me at the immigration counter. Are you here working? Why are you carrying cymbals? You're not British. And, we don't know if we're going to let you in because maybe you're, that was a big thing back then.
Yeah, sure.
With
Yep.
people
I
coming in
understand.
and immigration saying, hey, you're not English. Why you have that guitar with you? You're
Yeah.
going to work? I mean, they turned some guys away and put them back on the plane, would send them back to America and say, we don't believe you. We think you're good. I mean, so I wouldn't bring anything with me. I just said, I came in, I'm here to visit friends. That was it.
Yeah.
No
Yep.
symbols, nothing.
That was the smart thing to do. Dave Maddox, by the way, is watching, and he's saying great playing from Andy on Ron Wood's own album. So
All right,
great.
Dave,
Yeah.
love
I had,
you.
yeah. Love you, Dave. I had him on about a month, well, more than a month ago now, I guess, and yeah,
A
he's a
Brit,
local guy.
a
Yeah.
Brit in Boston.
Of Britain, Boston, right?
I'm an American in London. We traded places. The grass is
Exactly.
always greener on the other side.
That's right. That's right.
By
Oh,
the
that's
way,
funny.
just to hit on one quick little point,
Yeah.
just because you're very meticulous with a lot of your detail. Love is Alive, the Gary Wright Dreamweaver album,
Yes.
that was done to an old Sly Stone drum machine.
No shit. Wow.
Just in case anyone listened and thought, God, Andy has perfect time. This,
You do though.
this thing lines up with a click track, man. This guy, no, 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 no. It's done to a rhythm ace, okay? But not the cool Lynn drum machine and the stuff that it's the old rhythm ace with the tango one and the cha-cha and the rock one, just like
Yeah.
Fred.
Yeah.
It's funny, I ended up on 2 records that used the rhythm ace. I mean, it's so easy to play with when you hear those little boom, beep, beep, boom, beep, boom, tick, boom, beep, boom, tick. It's just so easy to play along with it. So if you listen to Love is Alive, you can hear the rhythm ace. It's
okay.
on.
I'm going to listen. Yeah. When we're done, I'm going to listen. Again, it's totally, fake me out because I hear it sounds so free and so loose, and it is. It's not, and it's not. That's not
Well,
an illusion.
here's something I think people should realize. Back then, with recording quality as it was, nowhere near as the clarity you have today. Back then, I played along with the rhythm ace on the Fresh album and Gary's album. If you heard just the drums on Fresh and the rhythm ace, I'm all over the place. If you really hear it, you can see that I am not locked in with the machine. I'll move ahead, then you hear it in the cans, I compensate, then I back in. But that's why it feels so live, because I am not playing I'm not playing robotic time, which of course today we're all brainwashed into thinking we have to be able to produce robotic, digital, perfect drumming because we're competing with click tracks today. But at the time, that's why the Fresh album kind of has a vibe, is that the drums, they're not locked in with, they're not so out of sync that you go, this is fucked up. But it moves all over. If you saw that on Pro Tools or Logic, you'd go, oh my God, look where the drums are. But back then, the quality of recording and the microphones, it was just kind of a blur. And you got the vibe. There's the little drum machine cooking along. The drums sound like they're in the pocket, but I wasn't. Believe me, there was so much discrepancy. Again, I had not become anal yet. I had not been driven to where drummers have been driven to today by digital technology, that we're afraid to play 1/8 note out of time even. We're constantly looking over our shoulders for fear that somebody in the studio is going to say, look at this graph. Look, your bass drum, it's 1/2,000th of a second before the click. Oh my God, we have to repair this. This is horrible.
I know.
It's like, the shit has gotten really out of hand. But in the 70s with the rhythm box, I just want to point that out.
I'm glad you did. Yeah.
It was a very, very loose affair, but it feels human.
Andy, if you have some more time, and I know we've been on for a while, and we haven't even talked about Double Fantasy. And I know a few people have asked. I want to talk about that for, at least for a little bit, if we could. I remember you were on another one of these with Russ Gleason a while back, and once we opened those floodgates with you, it was some of the things that came out were just amazing. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about working on that record, John Lennon's Double Fantasy record.
Well, I was really, really thrilled and happy to get that call. Number one, I think that's
Yeah.
the major headline. I was so excited about that. It just felt for me in 1980, after 10 years of freelancing, I thought, man, this is not that I felt like a fitting end, because I didn't see the end coming or his death. But I mean, I just thought, this, man, maybe this could be a gig. Maybe this could be my bread and butter gig for a while. Like,
Yeah.
Tony Levin has the Peter Gabriel gig, and Russ Kunkel has the James Taylor gig, and Steve Gadd has the Eric Clapton gig. And, you associate different. I thought I never had one of those bread and
Yeah.
butter gigs. I thought, oh man, this is so cool. I respected him so much. And I just thought, God, maybe this is after 10 years, I'm going to find a home, a little home with 5 people and an artist, and it'll be an ongoing thing that I'll always be a part of. Granted,
Yeah.
on a salary, not on a percentage, but you know
Sure.
what I mean.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was so happy and excited about it. And the sessions, the vibes were so fun. He was in such a good mood. He hadn't been recording for 5 years. He had been in retirement, as he calls it. He was a house husband for 5 years. That's what
Right.
I was raising my son,
Yep.
because he never had any contact with his first son, Julian, and he wanted to make it right with Sean, his second son, and really be a hands-on father.
Mm-hmm.
So he was a house husband living out in Long Island. Yoko was running the business in New York out of the Dakota. And he was out of music for 5 years. But when he came back, he was clean from all the getting high. He'd been high on one thing or another most of his life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. When
But
you
he
think
made it
about it,
work.
yeah.
He made it work.
Oh man, did he ever? Yeah.
he made psychedelia and drugs acceptable. Because if you can make music like that on drugs, it can't be all bad. Anyhow, he was clean, 40 years old, really so happy to be back in a recording studio. The vibes, man, were so good. Everyone, Huey McCracken, God bless him, we've lost Huey.
Yeah.
Tony Levin, Earl Slick, George Small, Arthur Jenkins on percussion. Everyone was just so damn happy to be there. And a lot of it trickled down because John was so happy to be there.
Yeah. Yep.
And it wasn't Arthur Jenkins, the percussionist. He was on some of the early Lennon sessions in the 70s, with Keltner and Klaus Vorman and, all the crowd John used. What's his name? Harry Nielsen and all that. And, they were all getting high, and the sessions were pretty crazy, and just all kinds of substances going around. That's what it was in the times. But Arthur noted by comparison that back then it would take all night, and you might not even get a track because everybody was so out of it. Could even take a night or two. He said, but now in 1980, when all that sort of is passe, and here we are in the studio, granted, we're different guys, but Arthur's like, to see John in a completely sober situation with sober musicians, and no one is getting at all high on anything. He says, it's so much more professional, and we're nailing 2 tracks a day.
Wow. Yeah.
because John was on the money. For starters, he was fully focused, was in complete control of what he was doing. We had a feeling like we shared this with each other over time, the guys in the band, but we shared with each other that when we arrived, unbeknownst to each other, we all were wondering the same thing and wondering, would John, not having been in the recording studio for 5 years, would he be on top of his game? Or would we sense, like a lack of confidence or anything like that? We all were thinking that, but we didn't share it till much later. And what happened on day one is he quickly proved to all of us that there was absolutely none of that. He immediately conveyed confidence.
Yeah.
I'm in charge. I know how to make records. Let's get down to work. And right on the first day, he was going around the room pointing on the first run through of the first song. Okay, Andy, I like the pattern on the bass drum in the verse. Do that in the chorus as well, but I want you to stay on the hi-hat, and I want this, very specific with me.
Yeah. Yep.
Don't do that. Do that. If you do a fill, I don't want any ba 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 ba. I just want ba ba ba, or very, very specific instructions
Yeah. Yep.
what to do. I love that, because I like direction in the studio. And when people can convey it, things get done really, really quickly, because
Sure.
they can just say, do that, don't do that. I don't want to fill there, and no symbol there. And they spell it all out.
Yeah.
And he went around the room to Tony Levin, Huey, Earl, and each of us. And he really fine-tuned everyone's part. On the bass, he said, get down into bass talk with Tony. And with the guitar players, of course, he is a guitar player, he would say, guys, this, and I need you to change your sound, and let's do that. And now I need you to lay off that part. And I like, he knew how to get right in there.
Yeah.
And get what he wanted out of you, which is essentially the job, of a producer.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we all realized within an hour that he was totally together and on his game, and that there was 5 years out of the studio didn't matter at all. He knew what he was doing, knew exactly what he wanted to do, and his main message to me was always, he couldn't remember my name in the beginning. He couldn't remember any of our names. We were all new people, except for McCracken. He knew Huey. But he'd say, drummer. He said, look, I will remember your name soon, man. So forgive me for calling you drummer. And then Jack Douglas would go, oh, it's Andy. It's Andy. Okay, Andy, sorry, man. Listen, I will get your name eventually. Listen, Andy, when in doubt, play like Ringo.
Yeah.
That's all he had to say. When in doubt, play like Ringo. He's my favorite drummer. And that gave me all the guidance I needed. It was like, okay, now you know what not to do, because Ringo is a completely emotional player. It's all emotion and groove and minimal fill. It's just beautiful accompaniment and support of the song. With no decorations and no little drummy, little frilly, little musician, chopsy, little bullshit things, none of that, those, whatever you call all that stuff, the decorations that have nothing to do with real heartfelt groove. Once he said, play like Ringo, I knew to stay away from anything drummy. And I knew the Beatles records, and I knew how Ringo played. It was, golly, it was just right in there. It's deep groove and like great time. And so fortunately, I could relate to that. I mean, if someone had said, play like Jack DeJohnette, please, or play like
Yeah.
Elvin Jones, or play like Jim Keltner, or whoever, I'd be like, oh fuck, gee, that's not really home base for me. Maybe you should call Jack DeJohnette or Jim Keltner, or maybe you should get one of those guys and don't ask me to do that. But he chose the one name of one drummer who I could, in my own way, emulate, just coming from a rhythm and blues background.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was the one guy I could go, okay, all right, well, I can relate to that because it's basically R&B values. It's groove drumming. So I was lucky in that regard, and he was, he was happy with that. We got good results really quickly. He liked the
Man.
takes. We liked the takes. I mean, it just was, the whole thing was rolling along. So happy. He, just good vibes, and everybody was in the band, and Jack and John and Yoko. Because we were doing tracks for Yoko, we do one of John, and then after John, we do a Yoko song, and John would go in the control room and sort of take over with Jack on the producing and like telling us what to play and what not to play. So Yoko was in good form. They seemed really in love, to be honest with you, considering all that we'd heard about them breaking up and all the sex, drugs, and rock and roll and craziness that John had been through. They were always holding hands, hugging each other. He was supportive, totally supportive of her, as we all were. We gave as much love and attention to Yoko's songs as we would to John's songs. And it was just such a feeling of unity, and then of course, when he said, listen, I'd love to do some concerts. Would you guys be up for going on the road? And it was like, well, gee, John, maybe I need to check my diary. I'm sorry. Sorry, let me just check my calendar. I'll come back to you tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
It was like, yeah, no problem, bro. We're in. Concert, we're in. Right now, you got the commitment. I'm in 100%. You just let me know when. I'm there. And I was really excited. I just, my ship has come in. Maybe this will be like an ongoing gig with a great songwriter, an artist who I respect, someone who likes my drumming, and it seems to gel, and what I do, he seems to like. And I just sort of felt it's a nice fit. I can be my Andy, and it works for him. So it was very pleasing for me to just play the way I like to play and see the artist happy, because I've been on the other end of that spectrum where I'm not the right guy and the artist is not happy with what I'm doing, and it's an uphill battle and it's horrible. I know both extremes. So it's really nice when you get to be in a nice, comfortable situation, which of course, that's what bands are all about. It's being with 4 or 5, 6 other people who accept you and like what you do, and you're not having to prove yourself. And you're in a band and you support each other, and that gives you the confidence to try to stretch out and create, because you're with your mates, your friends, and they care about you. And that's the environment that you grow in and bloom and flourish, when you're liked and you like them and they like you. So it was a wonderful situation, man. It was, I don't know, does that give you a little taste of?
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And the only question I had is, and I think you've answered this question. Like some of those drum fills that you played, like the big, of course, the big drum break and starting over, did John give you some basic direction and then you actually came up with that fill, or was he pretty specific on what he wanted you to play? Almost, did he say play boom, 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 bap, bap, boom, bap, bap, boom?
Good you brought it up. Now, I'll tell you, that fill is electronically concocted with, here's what happened. I played just on the tom-toms, boom, boom, da, 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 dun, dun, the 3 and a 4 and a 1
Yeah,
to bring the groove back in. Boom, boom, da, 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 boom, right?
yeah,
When they went to mix it, John and Jack said, it just doesn't have enough oomph. We need to fly in some other notes here to make this more punchy. So they took a snare drum sample, took a sampler, sampled one of my snare drum hits, put it in the sampler, and somehow they flew it onto the tape so that you got one on the snare drum. You
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah.
da da da. Now it would take 4 hands to play that, because if
Exactly.
you're
Yeah,
on the tom-toms, you would need 4 hands.
yeah,
Or
yeah,
or you could do the toms with one hand maybe, and the snare with your left, and go blap blap blap. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah.
You could do the unison, because they put the 2 snare drum beats bapa bapa right in with the toms. So those notes are on top of each other. Exactly. Boom, boom, da bapa bapa. But it made it sound bigger than life.
Gigantic on
And like
yeah,
everyone was like, how did you do that? God, man, that feel is amazing. How, God, you have like 3 or 4 hands. And like, I have to tell people the truth. I didn't do it. But then young drummers were coming along, and like always, pushing the envelope. I found young drummers who figured out how to do it all by themselves, and they would show me. I go, I love this fill you did. And they would do it
oh
with
my,
toms and the snare drum. They figured out how to do it by themselves.
oh my God. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anyhow, it's
Well, you
funny.
know, when I heard it on the radio, it was so big and so huge. And then when I bought the record, I remember listening like with headphones and thinking, okay, it sounds like he's overdubbed a second part of this, but I didn't know that to the extent of what that was to do. I just thought you went back and just put those snare hits in there separate, but I
No,
didn't realize they were flown in via sampler.
yeah, because this happened the night they mixed it. They said, we've got to beef up this drum fill. I
Yeah.
was I was long gone. You know, they hadn't seen me for weeks. So they
Yeah.
did this thing where they take a snare drum off the tape and sample it, and then they fly it in and they get it to line. You know how they do all. I
Yeah.
mean,
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
the beginning of all that stuff. So yeah,
That's
it's
cool.
good we touched on that.
I'm glad we did. And the last bit about that was in the drum fills, like in watching the wheels. Like again, those are live fills, right?
Yeah,
Those you played live, and
everything.
yeah.
No click tracks on Double Fantasy, for starters. Very proud to say, thank
God
God,
bless John. Yeah.
no clicks. He never would go for something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, none of us would really through the 70s. This whole click thing, was alien to all of us. Um, you know, I mean, none of us ever complained about a Beatles or Stones record speeding up a
Right.
few BPM, and they do. They all do, but
Yeah.
no one complained about it. Went, oh my God, I can't buy the new Beatles album. It's sped up from 92 to 97 by the end of the song. Oh, this is horrible. I mean,
Yeah.
who gives a shit, right?
Yeah, exactly. Honky
So
Tonk Woman was a number one hit, and it starts at probably, I don't know, 110 or 112 and finishes at about 120, you know.
no one cared, because
No
in
one
rock and
cares. Yeah.
roll, the feeling is the feeling is the feeling.
Yeah.
So John Lennon would never, if a producer had said, I think we should do this to a click, he'd have been, I think, really put off. It's like, what? let's just play. And he had good time anyhow and a good sense of groove. So very happy, no click. However, all live tracks, beginning to end, no drum overdubs. What you hear is the band, a 4-piece band playing.
Playing live. Yep.
Yeah, no overdubs, just live takes. And yeah, I'm proud of it. You know, it all feels good. And
Absolutely. Yeah. And it sounds and feels, I was going to say too, Andy, and it really has that organic feel and sound to it. And it's good to know that it is indeed that, you know what I mean? It's a, you know,
the problem with it, the
it's
now
real.
today is gone, with everyone now being so conscious of every note being so in time, is that if we were to go back to those recording values of the 70s, where it's just people in a room playing live and not worrying about all this stuff on the graph. I mean, I wonder if people could make the adaptation back to that, or if everyone would just hear it and go, oh, we can't have this. We just
Yeah.
can't have this fluctuation in meter. We've just grown into something else now. Or would people go, yeah, this is okay. This is fun.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I don't know. You know, there are still some bands out there that have that sort of what we'd call a throwback kind of sound, you know, but I mean, you're right. By and large, the sort of pop records that we hear on the radio now are all that, you know, are on a grid, you know, it's, I can't listen to it. I mean, I won't get into that now, but it's,
I think
my wife can listen to it. I can't.
I think forcing bands into the studio, bands, young bands or band, you know, a band going in to make their first record, forcing them into the confines of a click track, to me, is stripping that band of their personality.
Mm.
I mean, Charlie Watts and the Stones, those records have a personality because it's the Stones playing live. And the time is all over the place, but it chugs along.
Yeah.
And it feels good. You can dance to it, no problem tapping your foot. I mean, same with the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, The Who. I mean, that's the reason those bands have such personality, is because all their time discrepancies are part of their groove.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
Keith Moon was rushing like mad, and you couldn't ask Keith Moon to play those busy drum. You couldn't ask him to do that to a click track. It
No.
just wouldn't work. You would lose all the urgency and the excitement of it.
The energy.
But
Yeah. Yeah.
so forcing these bands today into click track world, to me, is stripping the personality potentially that band has, like the Stones and all the bands back in the 70s and the 60s. Their personality was involved in their whatever, their imperfect time.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was part of the vibe.
Yeah.
Each
Yeah.
band, each drummer had his own discrepancies, but it worked. Now you force a young, not necessarily young, but a band making their first album into a studio, and you force them into a click track situation, and maybe they're not used to it. It's a mind fuck
Yeah.
for any players, and the records come out all sounding generic, like
Right.
there is no individual personality.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
down. I mean, listen, I understand the click is a great tool for film music and jingles, because you get it to begin and stop at exactly a spot. And I
Yeah.
understand the brilliance of it for editing on the graph, because the click allows engineers to edit right on the bar line. I see the beauty and the flexibility that digital click, all this recording, the way we do it now. I understand the flexibility it gives people. But on a soul level, just as a rock and roller, it
Yeah.
is sucking some soul out of music that should be street music, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I wholeheartedly agree, Andy. Absolutely. And on that note, we are just over 2 hours, which I knew would happen. And
Man, I loved it. I so loved it. I get
I mean,
charged up doing this, man.
thank you
And
so much.
There's more to talk about.
I
There's a
know.
lot, there's a lot more. A lot more. We could go deep. We could go very deep on meaningful shit.
Well, let's do another one of these. Can we do another one of these? And I promise I won't ask you to talk about all the things we talked about today. And we'll go deep. We'll go deep into the shit.
Yeah, I'm in. I'm
Okay.
ready.
All right. We'll do it in the future. We'll do it. Great. This was so great. So much fun. And it's always so great to see you. Just, I wish
Thanks,
I could,
John.
wish I could pinch your cheeks. I will.
I love you, Mr. President.
I love you too, Andy.
Hey, you almost got the Democratic nomination. You almost took Joe Biden out.
I know. Well,
You're deep,
you're
man.
rooting
You're
for me.
hard. You could make a run in 2024. And I want to be on your team.
All right. All right.
I want to be your drummer. Your
Well,
road drummer.
You know you are my hero. You are my absolute hero, superhero.
All right, man. We'll talk
right,
soon.
All right, don't go away. Please hang on. I'm going to end the live stream and just if you want to say anything before we end the live stream, you want to say goodbye to anybody or
Well,
tell them all to
hi and bye to Stanley if he's still there. And who else have we said? Anyone else today? We've Dave
Maddox.
Yeah, if Dave and Stanley are still there, hey, you guys, later. Thanks for checking it out, and miss you. And that's it for any comments.
Okay. And Billy Amendola was watching too. I think you know Billy.
Amen.
I saw him.
Amen. Dola.
Amen Dola. That's right. All right. Well, Andy, sit tight just for 10 seconds. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for watching, everybody. This has been so incredible. Excuse me. We had a whole bunch of folks watching, many. And I'm going to put this up on YouTube later. Big hand for Andy Newmark, my very good friend. And tune in Wednesday for Jerry Murata, 1 p.m. Eastern time. Yeah. My favorite Murata brother. Andy's too.
Go, Jerry.
Yeah, go Jerry. All right.